Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff.
And I'm Alex.
Hey, Alex, how's it going today?
It's going well. Another day to talk about football.
Yes, sir. We are on episode 7. We are a week away from the NFL draft. So, this time next week, we will be watching the NFL draft. And thank you to the folks that took some time to listen, download, and like our last week's episodes, as well as commenting. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, with the handle at N2EFantasy. Alex, what do we have for today's show?
We have Jalen Hurts signed a new contract with the Eagles. We have the Cowboys exercising CD Lamb's 5th-year option. We have a bunch of smaller signings that we can talk about. We have some free agent transactions and rumors around the league for San Francisco and their quarterback situations. As well as potentially talking about Tua and Tom Brady, Miami. And then we have my top wide receiver rookie prospects for this upcoming draft. And I couldn't do just 10, so I added 2 bonus wide receivers for you guys
Did you cheat? I think you cheated.
by adding 2 extras.
Yes, sir.
I just, I couldn't do 10. There's a lot of guys that I like this year.
Well, I'm sure when we get to it, there won't be any surprises.
No, there's one surprise, and you are free to call me out on it later. But let's get started. Let's talk about big quarterback contract news with Jalen Hurts signing that extension with the Eagles, 5 years, $255 million, over 179 million guaranteed, the largest contract anyone has gotten to date, and he's the highest paid quarterback for the moment. Jeff, how do you feel about this signing? Was it a good deal? Go ahead and go for it, man.
So for the Eagles, this is the best that they could hope for because they beat Burrow, they beat Herbert, they beat Jackson on their extension deals here. 5 years, 255. It breaks the previous record of 250, so it's not like a crazy amount that they beat it by. And they didn't fully guarantee it, so we're not quite at that point yet for quarterbacks. I do think at some point in the future we do get to that point for quarterbacks. I mean, right now we are 76 million away from it being fully guaranteed. So we're getting inching closer and closer and closer to fully guaranteed deals for quarterbacks outside of Deshaun Watson. I do think that Philly was smart being the first one to wrap up their quarterback because they are going to probably pay the least out of the 4 quarterbacks that I've listed, because usually it's the next quarterback that gets paid more and the next quarterback that gets paid more, especially when you hit like a specific tier of quarterback. I also think it's good on Hurts for signing it, first of all, after only one good year. And then number two, he didn't really draw this out like others would have. And he was like, all right, 51 million a year. Let's sign it. We're good and let's get to work. And now there's not going to be any animosity between each other. They both feel like they're getting a good deal on both sides. So, what is your thoughts on it?
I like that they re-signed Hurts. I think he's a really good quarterback. He's proved himself. He's gone to a Super Bowl. He's proved he's worth it, and I think it also shows no one's going to get a fully guaranteed contract like Watson. I don't think it's going to happen again. They would have to coordinate together, Burrow, Herbert, and Jackson, in order to force it to happen if they really did want it. But I don't think that it will. I think Herbert is probably next. I don't know if Jackson has the maturity or real understanding of his actual value to negotiate soon. I think he kind of draws it out because I think he's going to think that he deserves to be paid the highest, despite he's never been to a Super Bowl. I think out of these four, Burrow probably gets the biggest contract. I think he's the best one of the four. but I would certainly rather pay Hurts over Jackson at this point.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. So do you think Burrow waits till after Herbert? Because we can almost safely assume Herbert's going to eclipse Hurts at this point. Whoever goes next, the person after that's going to eclipse them as well. And quarterbacks, while they don't like to move down the totem pole, they do like to watch their fellow quarterbacks get paid because they do know when they come up again, they're going to be able to escalate that one more, one more, one more. So they kind of root for it behind the scenes for that to keep escalating. It's going to be an interesting summer because I'm assuming there'll be a cutoff where they've dragged their feet too long and then that kind of turns into more of like a Lamar Jackson situation. And I'm assuming neither one of them want to do that. So it'll be interesting to see who gets the deal that they want first, who signs it, whether it's a 10-year like Mahomes, whether it's a 5-year like Hurts, or somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I definitely think Herbert's the next one, just based on the other two guys that are still left. I think Burrow gets the most, but I think it's interesting because I know that Mahomes signed a 10-year deal a while back. But if these guys get a significant bump, I could see Mahomes in the next year or so getting a revised contract where he's the highest paid just to keep him happy.
Right. With the Mahomes deal, they did say, hey, here's a $500 million for 10 years. And that's not like chump change. That's like a serious commitment by an organization, and no organization since or ever has ever offered up a $500 million contract, even over 10 years, to
That's
a
true.
player.
All right. So we've got another contract. That is the Cowboys exercised CD Lamb's 5th year option, which seems like a no brainer to keep a top wide receiver with the team an extra year. Jeff, do you think an extension is coming as well, or do you think they ride on the 5th year option? And how do you feel about CD Lamb?
So he's extension eligible right now. I do think they start to negotiate a contract with Lamb now, but obviously they wanted to let him know that they not only have him for this upcoming year, but they have him for the next year. So that does give Dallas some leverage in these contract negotiations because they're basically ripping up 2-ish years of the deal. So it'll be interesting to see what Lamb feels about that. But I do think that Lamb is one of the premier wide receivers in the league. He's probably top 10 for me as far as talent goes and excitement to watch. He's electric. I don't know how else to put it. He's little, but he's electric, and I know there's always like injury concerns with these types of wide receivers, but he's been pretty healthy through the 3 years so far. And last year he really stepped up, especially after a rough start, where he really stepped up into like that alpha 1 wide receiver role, and I see him being the wide receiver 1 in Dallas for a while because we know Jerry likes to pay his superstars.
I think that they, like you said, they have all the control right now because they have the last year of his regular rookie contract, so the 4th year, which is this coming year. 5th year option kicks in the next season. They have up to 2 years to franchise tag him, realistically. So they have control for the next 4 years, but it probably benefits them to just go ahead and iron out a deal, which will save them money in the long run and pay Lamb sooner.
So moving on, Olamide Zacchaeus signs with the Philadelphia Eagles. He leaves the Atlanta Falcons, where he had a relatively decent year, pretty much just behind London there. And he's probably the wide receiver 4 on their depth charts behind A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Quiz Watkins. Do you see him playing a big role? I mean, outside of it, an injury?
Well, first off, don't feel bad if you feel like you mispronounced that name because apparently Nick Serrani can't pronounce it either, and he, so I thought that was kind of funny. I think that Quez and Zacchaeus, I think they're probably on the same level, so either one of them could be the third or fourth receiver. They could even go after another wide receiver in this draft in the middle rounds. So he's a good depth signing. I don't think he pushes for fantasy relevance though, but overall, it's a good depth signing.
Yep. And I think there was a lot of good depth signings this week as we get closer to the draft. There's going to be some veterans that are looking for a contract right now, as opposed to when the roster spots are all taken and then they're trying to fight to find someone with a roster spot for them. So that's why there was so many signings this week of veteran pass catchers. Next up is chosen Robbie Anderson. He signs with the Miami Dolphins. Where does he fit into the Miami depth chart? Is it ahead of or is it behind like a Braxton Berrios?
That's interesting. I would say technically behind because he's more of a vertical wide receiver, in my opinion, whereas Braxton is a slot. So Braxton will probably be used more on three wide receiver sets. And I'm not sure exactly how much Chosen has at this point in the tank, but he's still a good fourth wide receiver option. That this might eliminate the Dolphins from drafting a wide receiver. It's not 100% guarantee that they won't, but they're probably pretty good right now with that group.
Agreed with that. I did hear that Mr. Wilson is on the block, so that is something that they could be looking to do very, very shortly as well, because they probably do need to cut someone from their wide receiver corp at this point.
Cedric Wilson.
Yes, sir, Mr.
Yeah, he
Wilson.
they signed him to a pretty good deal. Was it last season? And now they're ready to move on from him. So
Per the
I think
usual.
yeah. So I think Chosen is probably the cheap replacement for that position.
Right. Speaking of not moving on, though, Dante Pettis did resign in Chicago this week, and it's good for him to get some pre draft money, as we were just talking about, because once these rookies come in and these roster spots start to come and get clogged with undrafted free agents, like there's less room for veterans like Dante Pettis here. He's probably the fourth or the fifth on the Bears depth chart. They currently probably have DJ Moore, Claypool, Mooney, and then it's going to be some order of Equanimous St. Brown and Dante Pettis at the 4-5 slot. It's probably a good signing for them because he did have some chemistry with Fields. Would you concur that it's a decent signing?
Yeah, it's a decent signing. I still think Chicago could probably use another wide receiver. I think probably one of them gets supplanted from someone in the draft, but overall, it's good to bring back someone who did well in your system and already knows the offense. And I think Pettis will probably last longer than some of the other guys there.
So I was just thinking today how crazy it is that Mooney is now the wide receiver 3 for the Bears. And I know we were talking about last year he was going to have a breakout year. He was the no doubt about it wide receiver 1. And now here he is, the wide receiver 3 on a team, probably the fourth pass catcher behind Komet. It just feels like his stock has fallen at a rapid rate. And it's just interesting to watch how quickly someone's stock can fall or rise in Dynasty.
Do you think he's third? You don't think he's second?
I don't think you give up a 2.01 for Claypool and don't put him at the second spot.
I don't know. That seems to probably have bust. So I don't know if Claypool sticks around. Honestly, I think they might just write that off. I think Mooney is a better technical receiver than Claypool is. Claypool is more of just an athletic monster that hasn't quite put it fully on the field yet. Hasn't quite got it all together.
Absolutely. As we know, GMs and coaches sometimes let their pride get into the way, especially when they make a big deal like this for the 32nd pick, which is basically a first rounder this year. I know it's a second rounder because Miami got their pick forfeited. It wasn't chump change for Claypool. So there will be a lot of egg on their face if they decide to move on from him kind of quickly.
Yeah, they could have gotten a better wide receiver in the draft at that same spot, or a really good running back at that spot too. So it kind of looks like a dumb trade at this point.
Absolutely. And speaking of stocks falling, Darwin Thompson was a dynasty sweetheart in 2019 for the Kansas City Chiefs. He was released this week by the Seattle Seahawks. This may be the end of his career. I know this doesn't have any fantasy relevance, but this was a guy that many of us thought was a sleeper rookie in dynasty drafts, and he just didn't pan out. And this may be the end of the road for him. And speaking of the road, on the road to recovery is Jalen Guyton. He re-signs with the Chargers, and he is still rehabbing his torn ACL that he did very early on last season. So he should be ready to go for the regular season. The guy is a really good fourth receiver for the team because they have Palmer, Williams, and Allen ahead of him. Does this prevent them from going out and drafting a wide receiver, or do you see them potentially still going out and drafting a wide receiver?
I still see them drafting a wide receiver, and I still think they're going to do it probably in the first round, in my opinion, or in the
Spoiler
second.
alert.
Uh, well, I'll have to maybe see if I can squeeze out a quick mock before the draft, but I think they will draft a wide receiver. That wide receiver will be their wide receiver three, and that will move Palmer down to four, Guyton down to five, and they will eventually, not this season, but probably next season, move on from either Keenan Allen or Mike Williams, is my guess.
Don't say that about Keenan Allen.
Get Keenan Allen's name out your mouth.
Special place in my heart. All right. So moving on to a few more depth signings, we have Chris Connolly signing with the 49ers. He's going to be a guy that could compete for the third job. I know they drafted Danny Gray last year, but that depth chart isn't very strong past Ayuk and Debo. It'll be interesting to see if Connolly contributes. I know they have Jennings as well, but it's not a particularly strong depth chart after the first two, and a veteran could contribute there. And I know we're going to get to it a little bit later. We don't know what the quarterback situation is going to look like there. So who knows if a third, even a second or a third pass catcher could be valuable in that offense.
Yeah, and I feel like Chris Conley is a guy that every team loves to grab and stash on their roster, and I feel like he's always a guy that, oh, he could break out this year. He could break out this year, and he never quite does it. I think he maxes out as a third or fourth wide receiver on a team's depth chart. So he's just a guy that continues to stay around the league despite never living up to his initial potential.
An under the radar signing was Chris Moore with the Titans. It's a good signing by Tennessee. He should be productive given the wide receiver depth.
You think so?
I do think so, and I think that he could actually surprise by being one of the starters week one.
Well, if they don't add anyone else, I can definitely see him being a starter because the rest of the roster is so terrible. I do think that they probably draft a wide receiver in this coming draft. There's a bunch of mid round guys that look really good. They could even take Jackson Smith and Jigba at number 11. That's still a possibility for them. Chris Moore is probably third wide receiver. That doesn't mean he doesn't get significant snaps. He's definitely a low risk, high upside guy. He's another one of these guys that people thought might have a chance to break out earlier in his career. It's definitely a good depth signing, a good low key signing for them in general.
Right, and I'm assuming Tannehill's going to be the starter week one there, and he just needs someone that he can gather chemistry with, hit the ground running, because that was not Robert Woods last year, even though I died on that hill pretty much.
Well, to be fair to Robert Woods, he was just coming off of an injury and wasn't fully himself, and they decided to move on from him rather than continue with him this coming season. It was just unfortunate, but at this point, they just need to get someone who can catch a ball.
Right, and one man's trash is Houston's treasure.
That's right. Super Bowl.
All right. On that note, moving on to a potential Super Bowl contending Buffalo Bills, they did re-sign their kicker to a 4-year extension tonight. Tyler Bass is now going to be a Buffalo Bill for the next 4 seasons, or until his guaranteed contract runs out. But is a relatively big signing by the Bills because we do know how important kicking is, especially in poor conditions in Buffalo. And I think Tyler Bass has more than lived up to that so far. Congratulations on him for being able to nail out an extension.
Hey man, kickers are people too. I'm glad he was able to get his bag. Good for him.
Absolutely. And now on to the biggest transaction of the week. Allen Robinson traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers for, I think, 10 picks higher in the seventh round. So it's basically Allen Robinson and a seventh round pick for a seventh round pick. Los Angeles will be retaining about 10 million in salary, and I think Pittsburgh just renegotiated or restructured the remaining 5 million into a bonus. So I think he's only making like 1.6 million on the roster this year. I think it's a very low risk, high reward signing by the Steelers, especially with a young quarterback that could probably use a veteran wide receiver in the clubhouse.
We'll talk about burying the lead. This is the most important signing that happened all week, Jeff.
Save the best for last.
It's just so shocking to me how quickly some of these guys' careers start to collapse because Allen Robinson, I believe he was a second round pick for the Jaguars and started off his career pretty well. He's someone I had on fantasy that did well for me one year, and then I drafted him another year, completely tanked from that point. And I think a lot of people last year thought he'd do well for the Rams. I didn't have him in any of my leagues because I wasn't sure, based off of his last year in Chicago, that he would be that great for them. And it turned out he wasn't. So I'm glad that I avoided that hype. But this is a very low risk, high reward pick for the Steelers because the Steelers have always been very good about maximizing wide receiver talent. Somehow they've been able to coach up these guys to have pretty great seasons. They might have a chance to rehab his career a little bit. And even if he comes in as a third wide receiver or quality depth behind the top two guys there, I think it's a good signing for them. It really helps out Pickett, potentially allows him to develop more, despite I'm kind of low on Pickett myself, but if they believe in him, they want to get more wide receivers for him to target. And I think it's a good move. They barely had to pay up anything for him. Like you said, it's shifting seventh round picks, which doesn't really mean much. And they only have to pay 1/3 of his salary, which is pretty crazy. I think it could also potentially mean there might be some moves going on in the future, maybe not this year, but I personally believe it means they might part with Deontay Johnson in the next couple years or so.
Yeah, they absolutely could, but Deontay is still there. He's still helping Pickens come along, and he's helping Pickett come along as well. Pickett, Pickens, Pickett, Pickens. Basically, he is their veteran presence right now, and it'll be interesting to see if the wide receiver breeding ground was because of Big Ben or if it was because of Pittsburgh. And part of me worries that it was because of Big Ben. We may see the end of if a wide receiver goes to Pittsburgh, they're going to do very well.
Yeah, I think he has a chance to bounce back, and we'll see if Pickett can eventually at least do most of the stats that old man Ben Roethlisberger did before he was out of the league. We'll see if Pickett can actually pick up his game,
Yeah, I
so to
mean, I
speak.
think year two Pickett is better than end of career Roethlisberger. End of career Roethlisberger was very painful to watch. And it was something that I don't ever want to watch ever again.
And you don't have to anymore. He's fully retired.
Absolutely. So, moving on to other news around the league, Brock Purdy dropped a little bit of a bomb in the news this week saying he may not play in the 2023 season. What are your thoughts on that?
He said he wasn't sure if he was going to play in the season yet. He just had surgery. He's coming along fairly nicely. We're not going to know until we get closer to the season how much more he has to go. He's likely to miss some time, maybe start on the pup, but I think he probably plays this year. However, that leaves them at a interesting point of what they do with Trey Lance. Do they start Trey Lance? Is Brock Purdy for sure going to be the guy for them? There's some interesting situations going on over there, Jeff. How do you feel about Brock Purdy and his recovery? How do you feel about who the starter is going to be in Brock Purdy versus Trey Lance? What do you think they do with Trey Lance? Go ahead and dive into that.
So I think the only thing that's really concerning about that statement is normally people would start with, I don't know if I'm going to be ready for the start of the 2023 season. Instead, his statement was, I don't know if I'm going to play in the 2023 season, which is completely different, and it's a lot more dark and dim than the I don't know if I'm going to be able to start week 1 of the NFL season. The other way makes it sound like he could miss the entire season, and I don't even know why he would put out that statement. First of all, like, it doesn't really make a ton of sense to put out that statement. Um, the media probably just asking questions and getting answers from players. But moving on to Lance, some news came out this week that San Francisco has been getting trade offers for Trey Lance. So they haven't been making the calls for Trey Lance to go away, but they've been getting a ton of phone calls coming in. Where could he go? What does this do with the uncertainty of Brock Purdy?
I think the only realistic place he can go at the moment is Minnesota. I know a lot of people want to link him to Houston. I think if that was the case, Houston already would have pulled the trigger on it. So I don't think he's going to Houston. So to me, the only place left realistically is Minnesota because Kirk Cousins is getting up there in age. He's struggled in primetime games, he's struggled with inconsistency. I still like Kirk Cousins, but he's not a long term answer for them. They have a low first round pick. They don't know when they're going to have a high first round pick to be able to go get really highly valued young quarterback. And they know that Brock Purdy played very well for San Francisco. When he's healthy, he's likely to be the starter for San Francisco long term. So now might be a good time to buy low a little bit on Trey Lance and try to get the quarterback of their future. I had floated around with you, Jeff, that potentially Kirk Cousins could go on his way back to the 49ers as part of that deal just because he's familiar with Shanahan and he could help them out for a season while Purdy recovers. But they don't have the cap for it. We've tried to run the numbers and see if they could make that happen. We don't think that they can actually afford that contract. So it's probably just straight draft capital if he ends up to Minnesota. Jeff, how do you feel about that? And what do you think a trade package likely would be?
So I don't think Trey Lance is going to cost a first round pick. So I think San Francisco can cross that off of their list. He's played what, 2 games in 2 seasons? And the last time that he's played more than 2 games in a season, back to back games in a season, was the 2019 season of his college career. So we are what, 4 years removed from that now. So someone's going to be buying on his potential, on his youth, on his talent, but we will see kind of what happens with Lance, because I do believe that he needs to leave San Francisco in order to potentially be successful in the NFL. And I'm not saying Shanahan's a bad coach. I'm not saying that he couldn't develop a quarterback. I'm just saying that he's not Shanahan's style of quarterback. And it's trying to fit a round peg in a square hole, and it's not working. You can't double down on something that's not working. If he went to Minnesota and backed up Kirk Cousins for a year, learned the playbook, learned from a true veteran, had the full backing of an offensive minded coach, which is what Minnesota has, I think that could do wonders for Trey Lance's confidence and ability to potentially succeed in the 2024 season. Now, you did start to convince me with this Trey Lance Kirk Cousins swap where Minnesota would retain some of the salary and they would get Lance in return. Because we do know that Minnesota is going to be done with Kirk Cousins in the near future. We just don't know when. We know that they're looking to get off of Delvin Cook. We know that they're looking to move on from Kirk Cousins. We know that they are looking to kind of recycle the bigger money positions right now. And it's never going to be a rebuild with them. I think that they'll always be in contention, especially with the way that coaching staff handled coming in last year. And they won, I think, 11 one-score games last year, which just speaks to what that coaching staff means to that team. So I could see those two positions cycled through and they could get rid of Cook and Cousins in the next year. Cousins is the type of quarterback that Shanahan would like to play with, someone that plays timing in the pocket, all that good stuff. He's kind of very Brock Purdy-ish. It does make sense from a standpoint of synchronicity between the coaching staff and the quarterback staff. I wouldn't be shocked to see the Vikings pull off a deal and acquire Lance sometime in the near future.
Yeah, and I know you said that you didn't think they could get a first. I think they could get a future first. I don't think they'll get a first this draft.
Right.
So I could see that potentially happening. And I agree with you that the Vikings, I don't think, are going to be rebuilding. I think they'll be retooling and getting younger, but they're always going to be in contention as long as Justin Jefferson is as dominant as he is, because I think he's basically quarterback proof at this point. I can see them competing, especially with the Bears aren't quite there yet, despite the fact that they have a bunch of draft picks and young talent influx. We don't know in general how the Packers are in that division, so potentially the Vikings only have to compete with the Lions. And Jared Goff isn't even willing to say that the Lions are the likely division leaders at this point. So we'll see if the Vikings make any moves in the draft or if they go after Lance. That's an interesting storyline to follow. And it also potentially Kirk Cousins could make his way to San Francisco at some point, maybe as a free agent. Anything's possible at this point. But let's move on to other quarterback news. Tua recently stated publicly that he had considered retirement after having multiple concussions in last year in 2022. I think that's very concerning. And I know you and I have talked about this before. I'm very concerned about his health with the brain injuries he's sustained. And I think that he should probably take some time off. I'm not saying he has to quit football, but I think he would benefit from time off. And coincidentally, someone asked Mr. Tom Brady if he would consider coming out of retirement for Miami, and he responded that he does have some friends there. So, Jeff, what do you think about what Tua said and the potential for Tom Brady to come to Miami?
So I have not erased Tom Brady from any of my spreadsheets yet because I learned my lesson last year. I know we've went over this before. I swear that the guy unretired the day after I got rid of him off of my projection spreadsheets and my fantasy spreadsheets altogether. So I'm not getting rid of Tom Brady. I still have more than enough reason to believe that he's going to come back for another season this year. He's not beginning his broadcast career until 2024. What's he going to do until 2024? I think that he's going to play. And I think a way to get Tua a little bit of rest is to bring Tom Brady in here and have him play one last ceremonial season with potentially the best receiving core that he's ever had. And I know he played with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, but I don't think he's ever played with a Tyreek and a emerging Jalen Waddle. And then also, Braxton Berrios is a poor man's Wes Welker. So it's like a Tommy made system. They just don't have the tight end that I would feel comfortable Tom Brady would want. But what's Gronk doing? Get the band back together for one more run.
Yeah, he could easily convince Gronk to come back, especially in Miami. They could also draft one of these really good tight ends in this upcoming draft. It's entirely possible that Tom Brady comes back and plays for Miami. If I'm not mistaken, I think his current model girlfriend lives in Miami too. So it all adds up. The girlfriend lives there. He's probably going to play there.
Yeah, so one last thing on this is we know that they picked up the 5th-year option on Tua, so it's guaranteed through 2024. What's to say that they just scoop up Tom Brady, play Tom Brady this year, and then go back to Tua in 2024? Give him a year to kind of get his brain right and be backing up Tom Brady. So he's not completely resting, he's not losing out on reps, he's just safe from live action football as much as he can be, because you can't not have him as your backup if you have him there. But how many games has Tom Brady realistically missed in his career? And I think it would be safe to say that Tua would probably play in the 10 to teen snaps next year if he was the backup.
Yeah, I would still have him on the roster just in case, but I think they owe it to him to also pay out his salary, even if they're going to bench him. I think they should also maybe potentially pay him a little extra, like pay out his incentives, even if he doesn't meet them, just
Right.
because they put him in that situation, the way that they rushed him back out, despite clearly having a concussion, as far as anyone watching could discern. It's kind of a weird situation. It kind of makes me feel bad for Tua. And it's also strange that they're willing to go after Tom Brady again after losing their first round pick because they illegally tampered and reached out to Tom Brady inappropriately beforehand. And the previous coach was fired because he wouldn't go along with it. So it's kind of dumb, I feel like, for them to put themselves in that position again.
Right.
They don't trust Tua to stay healthy, or they want to give him a break, then they need to bring somebody in. And there's no one better at the quarterback position than a retired Tom Brady.
Yeah, and to be fair, right now, all we know is that Tom Brady has just not said no to coming back and playing for the Dolphins. Not that the Dolphins are interested or anything like that. So that's all pure speculation at this point. But Tom Brady did not do anything to shut down rumors, and there would be a storm if Tua gets another concussion this year. The fans, the media would be calling for heads in that organization at that point. So they do got to look at that from a long term basis. Giving him the year off might do something to get in the good graces of the media and the fans again with Tua and health of their players.
Yeah, and I wouldn't discount a backroom deal. I know Tom Brady's good about destroying cell phones, so I think something could be in the works there.
Maybe. So moving on to your top 12 rookies. 12, not 10. We've done 10 for every other position. This is 12. All right. So do you want to kick us off with your number 12 wide receiver?
Jeff reached out to me and he said, I'm having trouble picking wide receivers for the upcoming dynasty drafts. Can you please put out a couple extra names? And I was like, sure, Jeff, anything for you. This is a very strange draft for wide receivers because there's no like legitimate top dog X number one wide receiver that's head and shoulders over anyone else. There's no Jamar Chase. There's no Justin Jefferson. There's no Andre Johnson. There's no big dog out there, but there are a lot of fringe round one, round two wide receivers that have a lot of good potential. There's a lot of good meet in the middle rounds, rounds 3 and 4. It's so strange that a lot of the top guys, in my opinion, are all slot guys. And that used to be almost a slur to call a wide receiver just a slot guy. But now today, the slot position has evolved and is very important. And you can put all kinds of different players there as long as they can actually do those routes and work the middle of the field. A lot of my top guys will end up being slot guys. And a lot of these guys were so close together that I could not do 10. I had a really hard time just doing 10. So I had to bump it up to 12 just to fit a couple guys in. So starting at number 12, it's a guy that I really like the upside for, but he has gone through a few injuries and not put up a full season or stats. So I had to add a little extra pros for you guys to offset that. but it is Michael Wilson out of Stanford. He's 23 years old. He's 6'2", 213 pounds. He ran a pretty good, not great 4.58 40. Like I said, injuries have derailed his career. He showed a lot of promise when he played, though. He really popped on the field. He has a lot of experience because he's a 5-year senior. However, this last year, he only played 6 games and had 27 catches for 421 yards, but it was an average of 15.6 yards per catch, 4 touchdowns, and he had an elite quarterback rating for his college quarterback when he was targeted, and that was 135.5, which is pretty phenomenal. Granted, small sample size. But he is the prototypical size, being 6'2" in the middle there and being relatively large. He also has just enough speed to go along with his physical side to give DBs serious concern. He is a dangerous catch and run type wide receiver. He's been limited at his career with a terrible Stanford team. He still managed to help his quarterback have a career quarterback rating when he was targeted. He has reliable hands. He shows willingness to make catches in traffic over the middle, which is very crucial and shows he's a pretty tough player. He is a really nice run blocker, which is very important. Very few wide receivers are good like that. And he can also go out there on sweeps with the size of like a typical tight end in college. He's a traditional split end wide receiver and has played 85% of his snaps out wide. He catches the ball with his large top 72 percentile soft hand. He is also a precise route runner, and he has an innate feel for setting up defensive backs and to create separation. He's very physical to get off press coverage and to release up the sideline or position himself inside the cornerback on slants and crossing routes. When he went to the Senior Bowl, he surprised a lot of scouts as being the best wide receiver in that game. And he caught 4 passes for 76 yards, including the game winning touchdown in the fourth quarter. So his cons, obviously, he's very inexperienced despite 5 years in college. He has decent but not elite speed and may not burn the top corners consistently because of it. And he's been plagued by constant injuries while playing for a terrible Stanford team, only playing those 6 games, as I mentioned. And he suffered a season ending injury in 2020 and has just one full season of college ball under his belt. That being said, he has tremendous upside. I comp him to, on the upside, being like an Eric Decker or maybe even a Michael Thomas caliber player. He certainly fits the profile of a Michael Thomas on a physical level. And because he doesn't have the college production, I value him somewhere between the third and fourth round of the upcoming draft. I think he has the potential to really pop if he can string out a full season together. I know that you're a big Michael Thomas guy. How do you feel about Michael Wilson?
Hey, if he's anything like Michael Thomas, I've been a huge fan of his career. I do think that Michael Thomas is going to rebound this year, and I'm still waving the flag. So if that is a comp for him, 6'2", a little bit slower. So I would definitely look at Michael Wilson in the later rounds of rookie drafts, probably round 3.
Yeah, I would imagine he'd fall around round 3. All right, the next guy on my list at number 11 is Tyler Scott out of Cincinnati. He is 21. He's 5'10". There's going to be a lot of those guys. And he's also 177 pounds, which several of these wide receivers are very slight this year. So it's a very strange year for wide receivers. However, he balances that out with a 4.44 40 time. In 2021, he played 14 games and had a solid, not great, 30 catches for 520 yards for an average of 17.3 yards per catch with 5 touchdowns, and had a QB rating of 133.6, which is very elite. He expanded on that in 2022. In just 11 games, he hauled 55 catches for 904 yards for an average of 16.4 yards per catch 9 touchdowns, and also another great QB rating when targeted, which is 116.9. He's someone that I think is super fast. He's a very twitchy player who has long strides and has a ridiculous take the top off the defense speed. He tracks the ball well when downfield, and he shows good ball skills, including the ability to go up and high point it in for contested catch situations, which is pretty great when they're not only fast but can also leap really high and do those contested catches. He is a former running back, and as a result, he's a great catch and run threat and a creative runner who has good vision in the open field. He'll also probably return kicks as well. Despite he is only average size, he was still considered very strong and athletic enough to play on the outside and lined up 96% of his college career on the outside. He provides an excellent option on jet sweeps and end arounds as well as wide receiver screens. And he has very reliable hands and shows a willingness to make catches in traffic over the middle. So on the con side, he has an average catch radius due to his limited arm length. So it's not as lengthy as you would want. He is a short boundary receiver and a non factor in blocking on the run game. NFL defenders may be able to knock him off his route because of his slight frame, and he's probably viewed as a slot option in the pros, which might be a little bit of an adjustment seeing how he played 96% on the outside. He doesn't always use his hands to secure deep throws, allowing the ball to hit his pads and chest. Those are things that he definitely needs to improve and why he's lower on my list rather than up higher. My comp for him is a T.Y. Hilton at the top end. So he's someone that I really like his potential, but obviously has to fine tune some things for me to feel comfortable with him higher up in the draft. So I view him as another third to fourth round caliber player in the NFL draft.
Sounds good. T.Y. Hilton was always one of my favorites.
All of these comps, for the most part, are going to be the high end. I'm not saying that they're going to be these guys 100%. It's just guys that they match up with similarly, and hopefully they can live up to some of that hype.
Absolutely. And as we get into some of the higher ranked wide receivers, I have done projections on them. So I will dive into them as soon as we hit the folks that I've done. I've done only the top 9 so far. So
Jeff's over there making notes. He's like, okay, this guy. All right, we'll get this guy.
anything to snipe you.
Ah, I'm always out here helping competition. All right. At number 10, we have a guy whose name is being floated out there more and more, and that is Jonathan Mingo. He is out of Ole Miss. He's 22. He's 6'2", 220 pounds. Despite being that size, he ran a 4.46 40 time, which is pretty phenomenal. In 2021, he played 6 games and hauled in catches for 360 yards and averaged 15.7 yards per catch with 3 touchdowns. And he had a QB rating when targeted of 96.4. In 2022, he expanded his game further. Over 12 games, he had 808 yards and 16.8 yards per catch, 5 touchdowns, and increased the QB rating when targeted to 100.6. He's broad shouldered, long limbed, and a smooth athlete who showed the ability to make plays downfield. He does a nice job catching the ball in stride. He's a decisive runner who doesn't go down easy despite his size. Mingo plays with smoothness and balance, and Mingo also shows a knack for setting up defensive backs. He's equally dangerous in catch and run situations as he is taking the top off of defense. He is a much better deep threat than his timed 40 would suggest, which will tend to get faster the deeper he gets. He's also an impressive blocker and can pancake a defensive back on running plays. On the con side, he will have to develop a better feel for sitting it against zone coverage. Mingo lacks the quick twitch to create separation off the line, but like I said, down the line, a little further, he gets faster and faster. He's had issues with consistency and had a number of focus drops. As a route runner, Mingo needs to improve. His technique is only average. My comp for him, again, these are upside comps, is Debo Samuel. I think he fits that profile fairly well, although he's, I think, a little bit bigger than Debo. He's a very physical, large. Again, I also see him going in the third or fourth round. Some people have him going potentially in the second. I'm not sure if I can quite see that yet, but he's definitely someone to keep an eye on as we get closer to the draft.
Agreed, and that is going to be a little bit of a lofty goal to reach for Debo Samuel because we've seen what Debo Samuel has become. But hopefully, he can reach his full potential. We do love when that happens. This dude is pretty large and pretty quick, and we might see what he can do in the NFL here.
Yeah, there's a lot of other guys out there stomping pretty hard for him, and they have him a little bit higher. I just think he has some rough edges, but he's a really physical, really athletic guy, in my opinion. So that might win out. All right, next on the list at number 9, I have Rashee Rice from SMU. He is 23, 6'1", 204 pounds and ran a 4:51 40 time. In 2021, he played 12 games and hauled in 64 catches for a decent 682 yards with an average of 10 yards per catch, with 9 touchdowns and a QB rating of 135.3, which is fairly elite. In 2022, he played also 12 games, bumped his catches up to 96, and had an elite 1,344 yards for an average of 14 yards per catch, 10 touchdowns, and QB rating dropped just a little bit to 99.9, which is still very good. He's a very fluid athlete, and he's excellent in short area quickness. He should be able to create separation, and Rice also has straight line speed to threaten down the seam. He is a natural playmaker at his best with the ball in his hands. He shows good sense as a route runner and provides an enormous catch radius over the middle. He has soft hands and uses his frame effectively to shield defenders, making him a major threat in the red zone. Although he's more of a possession target rather than a field stretcher, he's a fiercely competitive receiver and has a great run after the catch ability, making him a threat in the middle of the field. Rice also plays with smoothness and balance, and he shows a knack for setting up defensive backs, like some of the other guys I've mentioned. His cons: Rice will be coming to the NFL from a wide open spread offense, which he ran a limited route tree. That's another issue that's going to come up for several of these guys. Rice has inflated stats due to running underneath routes at SMU, and it remains to be seen if he can consistently create yardage as a deep threat. He'll also have to develop a better feel for zone coverage, and he also has been used on a very limited route tree, which will be a major hurdle for him adjusting to the pros. One guy that I have him comped to is Brandon Ayuk, another 49er receiver. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I know Brandon Ayuk has had to adjust to the pros in a similar manner. Jeff, how do you feel about Rashee Rice? Is he someone that you already have on your list, or is he now being added to your list?
Rashee Rice is already on the list, and he is currently my number 6 projected in points rookie wide receiver for this upcoming year. But I think with those underneath routes, he could easily catch 50 balls in year 1. Then we could see what happens in year 2 and he either grows or kind of just plateaus.
I should add, I see him as a second or third rounder. So I know Brandon Ayuk was a surprise first rounder, and I know Debo Samuel, I believe, was a second rounder. So I see him similarly there. I don't think he's a first rounder, though, like Brandon Ayuk was, but someone could. That's entirely possible. Next, at number 8, I have A.T. Perry from Wake Forest. He's another 23-year-old. He is 6'3.5". A lot of people round him up to 6'4". He is 198 pounds, and he ran another fast time at 4:47.40. He has had very good production. So in 2021, in 14 games, he had 71 catches for 1,296 yards. That's 18.3 yards per catch. He had 15 touchdowns, and the QB rating when targeted was 122.2. He had another good year in 2022. On 12 games, he had 70 catches for 984 yards at 14 yards per catch, 11 touchdowns, and a QB rating of 108.6. So his pros are he possesses prototypical measurables for an X wide receiver, at 6'3" and weighing almost 200 pounds. He has outstanding athletic ability, showcased with his broad jump ranking in the 98th percentile, as well as at 447.40. And he has long limbs and an elite wingspan. He's hugely productive. He's a decorated prospect who combined for 2,400 yards over the last 2 years and 26 touchdowns. He's very good in contested catch situations, using his frame to make plays. He also shows a knack for high pointing and constantly out muscling defensive backs. He has one of the strongest hands any wide receiver, coach, and quarterback could covet. He tracks the deep ball over his shoulder and brings in passes fluidly without breaking stride downfield. He accelerates quickly and possesses elite straight line speed, shows solid ball tracking skills and body control downfield, and is able to adjust on off target throws, showing skills he developed from a basketball background. That's always good for a wide receiver. He is not just a home run threat. He's very effective on slants, posts, quick outs, and comeback routes. That being said, his cons are he isn't particularly strong, and while he's tall, he isn't a dominant physical wide receiver, and his timing can still be disrupted by bigger defensive backs. He doesn't block as well as you would hope for his size, and he will need development in this area. Perry is more fast than quick, and he lacks some suddenness as a route runner. That is a potential issue on the next level. My comps for him is he could be like a Devontae Parker type who hasn't quite lived up to his potential in the NFL, or he can be a Michael Pittman who seems like he's on the cusp of it. That's where I see him right now. I mean, you might even potentially say he could maybe get to the point of a Mike Evans. That's a lot to say right now. Jeff, what do you think about A.T. Perry?
So he is not on my list yet, but after all of this information, he is definitely going to get a look after this. Your comps of Devontae Parker and Michael Pittman were a little bit high still on Michael Pittman, but we do know what Devontae Parker was and turned out to be, and it wasn't always pretty. I think with all of that being said, if that is his career path, I might stay away from him in dynasty or redraft leagues this year.
He's someone that I like a lot. All these receivers are typically receivers that I like if you can get them at a good spot. I think in the NFL draft, he likely goes in the second or third round. Maybe he'll slip past that a little bit, but I think he just has so much to offer as an X wide receiver. Like I said, the top part of the draft is more Z wide receivers as well as slot wide receivers. So the middle of the draft is where a lot of these bigger X wide receiver types are going. And if a team needs that kind of wide receiver, they might take him higher. He could be someone that goes in the second round. And with that draft capital, he might be more appealing to you depending on where he goes.
Absolutely. And obviously the age always concerns me like a little bit because we do know that there is a little bit of a wall at 28 for skill position players. When you're 23 and entering the league, that doesn't give you a ton of time to perform in the league.
True, I do think that's more of an issue for running backs than wide receivers, though. Wide receivers have a little bit longer of a career than running backs.
Agreed.
My next guy is someone a lot of people out there have much higher, and that is Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee. He is 21, so he's got that young thing going for you, and he's 6 foot tall. He's another guy who's 173. So he's going to be one of these interesting guys that's tall and skinny. He ran a 440 official 40 time as a junior. He exploded into the scene in college football after destroying the Alabama secondary, hauling in 6 receptions for 207 yards and an insane 5 touchdowns, all in that one game. He finished 2022 with just 67 catches, but still for an outstanding 1,267 yards for an average of nearly 19 yards per catch, 15 touchdowns, and a QB rating when targeted of 156.5, which is outstanding over those 12 games. He has elite speed as a receiver and can eat up cornerbacks' cushion in an instant. He can beat even the quickest defensive backs. I should mention, though, his 440 time was the official time. Some people had him clocked at 4.3, so he might be even faster than that.
Dang.
He has shown that he can totally dominate the top of secondaries in college football. He's pretty much impossible to stop unless double covered. He is an amazing catch and run threat, running hard and consistently picking up big yardage after the catch. He shows elite initial quickness off the line and has enough strength to be able to consistently escape the jam at the next level. He's a savvy, natural pass catcher with reliable hands and very good focus. He snatches the ball out of the air and shows concentration to make athletic catches look easy. Hyatt also tracks the ball well downfield and has elite deep threat wide receiver ability. And it can't be ignored that he led the country in QB rating when he was targeted in 2022. Despite all those glowing, wonderful things I said, the cons are a big chunk of his stats came in one single game. His tape is limited to just one season, putting up elite numbers. Prior to that, his performances were nondescript. He'll have to develop a better feel for playing against zone coverage, like many of these college guys will have to do. His route running tree has been very limited and will take serious time to adjust to a pro offense. Tennessee's offense is not easily translatable to the NFL style of offenses. That is the number one reason why I have him at 7 and not in my top 4. He has played most of his snaps from the slot and has rarely gone against press coverage, and he may struggle to convert his skills to the pro game on the outside, which is where I think most teams would want him playing. My comp players are Jamison Williams, who has not yet played in the NFL, and a better version of Will Fuller, who, as a Texans fan, I'm very familiar with. I think Jalen Hyatt is a better talent. I think he doesn't drop the ball as much as Will Fuller. I think he's better at tracking the ball, but he has so much work to do on the route running and learning a professional offense that I have him down at 7. I think he's going to be a second rounder. Some people think he might slide into the first. Speed talks, a team that needs a fast wide receiver might take him earlier. Jeff, where do you have him slotted on your list, and what do you think about him?
So you would be very surprised to know when I ran initial projections, and obviously this is teamless rookies. So obviously when they join a team, these could change and will change. He is wide receiver 8 going to 2023. So we're not too far off. Not too
That's
far
very
off.
interesting. So number 6 is Jalen Hyatt's teammate, Cedric Tillman at Tennessee. He is 23 years old. He's 6'3". He's 213 pounds. He ran a 4.54 40 time. He is the number one X wide receiver, in my opinion, in this draft. As a senior in 2021, Tillman broke out and played 13 games, had 64 catches for 1,081 yards at an average of almost 17 yards per catch, 12 touchdowns, and a quarterback rating when targeted of 155.8. Both of these guys have had phenomenal success rate in that regard. And maybe you can bump up Hendon Hooker in some regards. That's their quarterback at Tennessee. As a fifth-year senior in 2022, he played only 6 games and was sidelined due to an ankle injury. During the time he did play, he had 37 catches for 417 yards for an average of 11 yards per catch, 3 touchdowns, and a little bit of a lower quarterback rating of 93.7. That's pretty much explainable to his injury. A lot of guys might forget out there that he had a pretty good 2021 year. So he may not be as high in the media's eyes as I think NFL guys will view him. I like him quite a lot, and you'll know why from my pros. He has the prototypical outside receiver build at 6'3" and 213 pounds, combined with long arms and a ginormous wingspan that will make scouts drool. He also put some athletic doubts to bed at the combine when he ran the 4.54 40 time, as well as his broad jump was ranked in the 89th percentile. He also has surprising quick off the line ability, and he gets his first step on corners pretty easily playing press. He demonstrated this short area quickness with a 1.53 10-yard split at the combine. That's 74th percentile. Tillman also tracks the ball well down the field and consistently runs under long throws. He thrives on physicality. He is a contested catch specialist, which is always nice to hear, with a knack for warding off defenders while the ball is in the air. He has strong hands and the ability to wrestle the ball away from those defenders. He has put up an impressive performances against top SEC teams, so the NFL should not phase him out. He has elite, soft, strong hands, a little bit of an oxymoron for you guys, who has dominant in contested catch situations and in the red zone particularly. That will be very handy. Tillman also has quick feet, good body control. It allows him to gear down and quickly get in and out of his cuts. His hands are good, and he's a creative runner after the catch with elusiveness to slip tackles in space. He's a physical player, able to get off press coverage to release up the sideline or position himself inside cornerbacks on slants and crossing routes. He's also another excellent run blocker who sometimes looks like a tight end out there in the run game. Some of his cons are his play lacked any position diversity. He played nearly all of his snaps out wide on just the right side, with a few as a slot receiver from the right side. He never played on the left side and was never put into motion. So that obviously limits what he can do. He played in a limited route tree with the Volunteers. I have to make the same con for both of these guys, to be fair. That may be more of a symptom due to their offense than a limitation of his skill set. Tillman isn't going to overwhelm defensive backs with his speed. Even before his hurt ankle, his performances weren't quite as dominant as we could have hoped for. So some of the comps that I have for him, kind of space them out from low end, mid level, high end. One of my comps is Corey Davis, who was a second rounder. Cortland Sutton, who was also, I believe, a second rounder, and Mike Evans, who's one of the top receivers in the league now. I think he could potentially be anywhere on this scale, and we don't know yet. It's whether he can adjust to a pro offense after leaving Tennessee, but he has everything that you want in a skill set as an X. I have him in the second round. I know I've seen a couple mocks where he's actually comes in at the end of the first. One of the spots was potentially the Chiefs in a mock. Do you have Tillman on your list, and how do you feel about him?
I do not have Tillman on my list yet. I'm going position by position using Dynasty rookie rankings and just doing projections with players that I believe will find teams early. I do believe that this could be a little bit early for Tillman, but if your tape reading skills do pan out and he does go earlier than most have him, you might get a steal in the draft.
I will like to mention also that it's very risk reward with him because he has a very high bust potential with that Corey Davis comparison, but the upside, the sky's the limit with him. So I really like him for that reason, and I think he'll do well in the pros. The next guy on my list is a completely different caliber type of wide receiver, and that's Nathaniel Tank Dell out of Houston. He is 23. He's 5'8". I think he's the smallest one out of this group. Also, he's only 165 pounds, so definitely the smallest out of this group. But he's very quick with a 4:49:40 time. So in 2021, he played for 14 games and hauled in 91 catches for an outstanding crazy 1,327 yards for an average of 14.6 yards per catch, 12 touchdowns, and a QB rating when targeted of 116.2. Dell played in 2022 last season. He played in 12 games, had 102 catches for also another 1,300-yard season, and this time with 13 yards per catch, 15 touchdowns, and an increased quarterback rating of 132 even. He's someone I really like, especially coming from Houston, which is where I went. And he is a hugely productive wide receiver. He led the nation over the past 2 seasons with 2,700 yards and 29 touchdowns. Dell accelerates quickly and possesses elite straight line speed. He also shows solid ball tracking skills and body control downfield, able to adjust to an off target throw. He's a crisp route runner who never rounds the corners. He's probably one of the best route runners in this entire class. While he played predominantly from the slot receiver position, he displayed the capability to operate on the outside. I don't think anyone who actually watches him play can deny that. He has an elite lateral movement. He has the ability to get to the sideline in a flash. He has a knack for getting open and is the quarterback's best friend. Passers just need to toss the ball in his general area and he'll somehow come down with it. Dell has also proved to be a force in catch and run situations. He's an agile runner who transitions upfield quickly after the catch. Dell also has the speed to pick up chunks of yardage in the open field. He keeps his feet active and his eye is up to dodge traffic quickly and easily. He's an excellent straight line speed receiver and can be a breakaway threat at any level. He will initiate contact and runs through high tackle attempts, but overall isn't a powerful player. So main concerns with him, despite these glowing words that I just had for him, is that everyone's going to view him as tiny and he looks very frail. When you look at him, he is thin as a rail. It's to be determined if he can hold up against playing against much bigger defensive backs. When corners play press, they can manage to get a hold of him and he can be taken out of the game and out muscled. He'll be coming into the NFL from one of these wide open spread offenses in which he ran a limited route tree. I don't think that's an issue for him. He's ran drills for coaches as far as the route running tree. I think he can do any route. But again, everyone is going to knock Houston's offense because it is a spread offense. He doesn't have the size to consistently win on the outside, but he can be productive working in the middle of the field and as a return man. I have several different comps for him. I don't think anyone has quite been this tiny, but I think he has Tavon Austin style versatility. I think he has Deshaun Jackson ish speed. He reminds me a lot of Marquise Hollywood Brown coming into the league. And I think he has Tyler Lockett's route running ability. Those are all guys that are roughly similar height sizes to him. And I think talent wise, I think he's a second rounder. He might slide due to how tiny he is, but he's someone that I like a lot. And I'm very excited to see him play in the league.
Yeah, he's someone that you probably could scoop up in third rounds of rookie drafts. Just looking at kind of where he's going right now, and it's not super high. He's currently going 42 overall in rookie
In
drafts.
Dynasty?
Yes.
Interesting.
He's someone
I
you
would
could
target
trade
him in
back
every Dynasty.
exactly, trade back into the third round.
The next wide receiver on this list, Jeff, I believe, is one of your favorites, and that is Josh Downs out of North Carolina. He is just going to be under 22 years old. He's 5'9", 171 pounds, and he ran a 4.48 40. In 2021, Downs accounted for almost 44% of Sam Howell's total passing yards, and he caught 101 passes for 1,300 yards, making it the third time in Downs' career he would hit the 1K mark alongside a 106 passing rating. Further building up his elite connection, Downs would score 8 touchdowns. In the following year, after Sam Howell left for the NFL, Downs proved that his performance was not purely the result of Sam Howell by catching 94 passes for 1,000 yards, making it his fourth 1,000 yard season. He would also boast an immaculate 134.7 passer rating when targeted, and Downs would see his red zone targets increasing, resulting in 11 touchdowns, the most he had scored in a single season as a Tar Heel. He would also catch more than 72% of his contested catches, with 754 yards after the catch, which ranked third in the country amongst all wide receivers. My pros for him, he's an ultra productive 1,000 yard season wide receiver. He had an elite straight line speed, incredible acceleration. He reached his top speed quickly. He's a really good special teamer who has honed his vision, and it shows whenever he gets opportunities in space. And he has amazing yards after the catch. He has an advanced route tree, allowing him to line up all over the formation. He elevates bad QB play with impeccable adjustment due to his footwork. He is a vicious red zone target receiver as well. He's been very good in the red zone his entire career. His cons are, again, he's one of the guys whose size is going to limit him to potentially a slot only role in the NFL. He is an abysmal blocker, and even if he plays exclusively at the slot, teams will still expect him to help out. He gets caught up fighting DBs at the line of scrimmage, relying on strength that he doesn't necessarily have instead of the speed that he does. He has limited experience against press coverage, and when he's faced it, it hasn't been pretty. He easily gets knocked off routes by sticky corners. My comps for him, he's somewhere between a Rondale Moore type and as high as maybe a Steve Smith. He kind of reminds me a little bit of it because he's a little bit of a plucky, kind of feisty wide receiver who's a little bit on the smaller side and is a very good returner. So I can see a little bit of Steve Smith in him, especially coming out of North Carolina that just happened to line up.
Hmm.
So I know this is one of the guys that you like, Jeff, and I think he could go potentially in the second round. He might go in the third, but he could easily be in the second. Do you think a team like maybe the Panthers might get him?
So he is my number one 2023 projected wide receiver.
Wow.
And I have him with almost 20 more catches than the next best rookie wide receiver.
Interesting.
So it really boils down to if he can grab those catches and bring them into the end zone or not. But that is a surprise on your list and a surprise on my list. And if a team like Carolina ended up with a rookie quarterback and grabbed him in the second, I think that would be a very happy draft.
I will have to say though that the previous wide receiver, Tank Dell, if he was 30 pounds heavier and maybe a couple inches taller, he would be my number one wide receiver. But Tank Dell is so tiny, and then also Josh Downs is still a little bit tiny on his own right, so I don't feel quite comfortable making him a number one. But both of those guys, despite their size, are phenomenal wide receivers. It could be an outlier year for fantasy and for NFL production with small receivers getting a lot of targets, a lot of yardage. So I can see him potentially being that productive. It's someone that's definitely interesting to target, and I'm curious to see where he's actually going in dynasty rookie drafts.
He is currently going 11 in rookie drafts right now.
So the secret's out with him.
He's a late first rounder, but we will see. And he might actually be a little bit higher because a lot of the Fantasy Pros rankings use people who do super flex. So quarterbacks could be overinflated inside of Fantasy Pros.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have to have at least a mid-round pick to
Scoop them.
really secure him. Yep. My top three guys, I'm going against the grain here, and I think all three of my top three guys will end up in the first round in the NFL draft.
Ooh.
So I had a very hard time ranking them. I know people have their opinions. I know there's a consensus guy that's at the top, but I struggled with trying to order these guys. And number three guy is Jordan Addison out of USC. He's 21. He's 5'11. He's another one of these 170 pounders. He ran a 4.49 40. In 2021, played at Pittsburgh rather than USC, and he exploded with a incredible year. Over 14 games, he had 100 catches for nearly 1,600 yards, and he averaged 16 yards per catch with 17 touchdowns and a QB rating when targeted of 136.7. He was predominantly the main wide receiver. I don't think anyone really had much stats outside of him at Pittsburgh. He ended up transferring to USC for the 2022 season, in which he played 11 games and had 59 catches for an impressive, for that system, 875 yards for an average of about 15 yards per catch with 8 touchdowns and a QB rating when targeted of 139. That may not sound as great because he had almost half his previous production, but he went to a little bit tougher conference and he went to a system where they spread the ball out a lot more. He was still the number one target at USC. He's one of the best route runners in this draft, along with some of the other guys that I have mentioned there. And he has good athletic ability and some. He also has outstanding cut ability, reliable hands, and surprising toughness. He's often used on deep routes, getting separation down the sideline or over the middle on crossing routes by extending his arms rather than pure speed. He does a nice job locating and tracking deep passes and is a legitimate vertical threat, willing to go and attack the ball. And he combines speed, balance, quickness, vision, and crisp cuts to leave defensive backs and linebackers in the dust. He manages to find holes in coverage and has exceptional hands with equally impressive body control. Some of the cons are he's a very slight receiver who has never really faced press man coverage. It's something a lot of college receivers go through. It's yet to be determined how he'll hold up against pro level defenders. He may end up getting pushed around. 2022 wasn't as dominating as his previous year. It does not always use his hands to secure deep balls, allowing the ball to hit his pads in his chest, and he has more concentration drops than you would expect for a player of his ability. I think his speed doesn't always show on the tape either. Some of the comps that I have for him, I think he's somewhere between a Devonte Smith or a smaller Amari Cooper. When I watch him play, I see a lot of Amari Cooper in him, although Amari Cooper is a little bit bigger. I think teams will value him, and I think he'll be a low first round pick.
Absolutely, and I kind of concur with that. He is my number 2 projected wide receiver going into the 2023 season, and not only am I on board with that, it looks like Dynasty Rookie Rankings have him currently number 4 right now. Not wide receivers, but number 4 overall, so number 2 at wide receiver.
Yeah, I think most draft media people have him as the second wide receiver in the draft.
Yeah, I know for a fact you have someone else a little bit higher, and I think for a very good reason.
Yep. My number 2 wide receiver is Zay Flowers out of Boston College. He's someone I strongly considered at number 1, but decided to pump the brakes just a tad bit. He's 22, almost 23. He's another one of these a little bit shorter guys at 5'9". He's 182 pounds. He ran a 4:42 40 time. In 2021, over 12 games, he had 44 catches for 746 yards, which is an average of 17 yards per catch. He had 5 touchdowns and a decent quarterback rating when targeted of 84.7. However, in 2022, Flowers played 12 games again for 78 catches, bumping up to 1,077 yards for an average of 13.8 yards per catch, 12 touchdowns, and an increased quarterback rating when targeted of 106.1. He's extremely dangerous in the open field. He shows good vision and creativity to run through entire defenses. He has elite balanced tight roping on the sideline and in and outs on his breaks. He shows excellent start stop ability and burst. Flowers was frequently put in catch and run situations, and Flowers shows good vision with the ability to make tacklers miss in space. And he also breaks a tackle or two as well, and is extremely competitive and will give effort down the field as a blocker. He's also a violent runner with the ball in his hands, and he's very good at working outside the numbers, showing excellent ball tracking skills. And he just does a bunch of little things well down the field, including leaving enough room on the sidelines for his quarterback to drop in a throw. His rare suddenness with lightning footwork to create tight areas and elusive shiftiness and change of direction skills. He's got very good hands for the most part and accepts the ball fluidly on most throws and is ready to make a play afterwards. He makes catches in traffic, even going up over taller defenders with a good vertical and a little bit of toughness. My cons for him is he's, again, one of these undersized wide receivers. Flowers won't be for every team. I know a lot of teams still want their number 1 receiver to be 6'2" or taller wide receiver. He has just 29.5-inch arms, resulting in a smaller catch radius, along with the overall size issues may limit him to a slot only role in the NFL. I don't think that that's going to be the case, though. And Flowers doesn't display any real run blocking ability. That's a lot of wide receivers his size, though. Ultimately, I think his ability to sense coverage and sense a defender near him and his quickness, his agility, I think he's going to be a first round wide receiver. And I like him a lot. I compare him to, at a minimum, an Emmanuel Sanders type. And I think he has Antonio Brown and Tyreek Hill upside, despite those guys, when they were prospects, were almost considered undrafted prospects. And yet they had phenomenal careers in the NFL. I think he's a better prospect, but it remains to be seen if he can live up to that kind of hype.
So I don't want to burst your bubble. I don't want to burst your bubble. But right now, I currently got him at wide receiver 7 in the projections. And what that looks like is like 5.5 points per game in 2023. But I would say the consensus is a little bit closer to you because I have him wide receiver 4. But if he does end up with the Kansas City Chiefs, then the sky's kind of the limit. No pun intended, because Sky Moore is there.
I keep mocking him to Kansas City whenever I fiddle with my mocks. I just think it makes too much sense because despite winning a Super Bowl, they're still missing Tyreek Hill from that offense. They still don't have a receiver that is a top caliber kind of guy. They don't have someone who is that fast and reliable. I know that they have MVS, who is a very fast receiver, but he doesn't really move the needle for me. Sky Moore has a lot to develop. He hasn't quite shown it on the field yet. So just right now, losing Juju Smith-Schuster and they haven't re-signed McKinnon, they need to bring in a wide receiver. They don't seem necessarily willing to bring in a veteran. So that leaves a rookie. And they recently had Zay Flowers work out with Patrick Mahomes. They threw the ball around, played catch, did routes, tried to see if he could be a good fit for them. I could easily see them trading up in the draft to take Zay Flowers, and I know there's been a lot of links to other teams who are also interested. I know that the Ravens are interested, supposedly. He could go as high as 14 to the Patriots, although I don't think that the Patriots will draft a wide receiver that high. I think teams are interested in his upside, and I think that he will outperform your projections. And I think he's a good dynasty asset to grab, even if he doesn't have an elite first year. I think his year 2, year 3, he's going to have a huge breakout.
We will see. Time will tell. So I have 2 wide receivers left that could potentially be the number 1 wide receiver. Who did you pick? And then after that, we're going to talk about who you left off.
So at number 1, I went with not only one of the most talented wide receivers, but also probably the safest wide receiver, and it's who most people have, and that's Jackson Smith and Jigba from Ohio State. I don't think that's a surprise. He is just 21. He's 6'1", 196 pounds, ran a 4.52 40 time. He didn't really play much in 2022, but in 2021, he played 13 games. He put together the best single season for a wide receiver in the Big Ten history. He amassed 1,600 yards receiving, 9 touchdowns, and he had a QB rating of 141.8. And that included a historic Rose Bowl performance where he caught 15 passes for a record 347 yards. He did that despite having Olave and Garrett Wilson on the team. He has a knack for getting open and is a quarterback's best friend. Passers, again, just need to toss the ball in his general area, and he usually comes down with it. He often is used on deep routes, getting separations down the sideline or over the middle by extending his arms rather than through his speed. He's not a burner, but he is very good at getting open. I think he does a really nice job locating and tracking deep passes, is a legitimate vertical threat, willing to go up and attack the ball. I think he's the best slot wide receiver in this draft. I think he's going to be used everywhere. One of his cons is athletically, he is good, not great, and it may be difficult for him to separate on the NFL level because he has limited speed. He has that missing chunk from his junior year in 2022 because of a nagging, long-standing hamstring injury. He spent most of his college career playing in the slot. I think it was 90% is what PFF tracked. So it remains to be seen how well he can stand up on as an outside threat. I think that that's something that he has to work through. He comes from an Ohio State system that is a little tricky going from that system to the pros because it's very much a spread offense. He had really good wide receivers to take coverage away. So was it all just the talent around him, or is he that good? That's something that teams need to look out for. The comps that I have for him are a Julian Edelman type, maybe a Cooper Cup type. Also, he could be a more athletic Anquan Bolden, who's always been very shifty and able to make tough catches, get separation despite limited speed. I think he's a mid first rounder. I don't think any of these guys are a top 10 caliber pick, despite teams flirting with potentially taking him in the top 10. I think he's right smack in the middle. I really like him for fantasy purposes. I think most people like him for fantasy purposes. And he's one of these guys that's proved that slot receivers are receivers too. So I like him quite a lot. I don't know if he will fully live up to the upside of a Cooper Cup because I feel like Cooper was almost a 1 in a million type wide receiver. Jeff, how do you feel about JSN?
Yeah, Cooper Cup is definitely 1 in a million. I don't think we'll ever see another Cooper Cup story because he kind of came out of nowhere, and he is at times the number one wide receiver in the NFL. I know he's got some hefty competition right now with Chase and Jefferson, and then you also have Adams and Hill in there. But 1 in a million, as you said. But if he could be 80, 85% of that, that would be amazing. JSN, I currently have him number 3 in the rookie wide receivers, but that is not the consensus. The consensus have him at wide receiver 1, which is number 2 overall. So you're a lot closer than I am to consensus, and we will see at the end of the season who ends up right in there. But I would be very remiss if we don't talk about Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of his, as you can tell. That not only did I not have him in my top 3 or 4, which most people have him, I didn't even have him in my top 12. I think he is all athlete. I think he's a terrible wide receiver. He should have dominated more on the collegiate level. He did not. He had a very pedestrian 1,000 yard season despite playing for a team that competed for a national championship. He is one of the larger wide receivers and athletic wide receivers, but he body catches everything. He doesn't jump up. He doesn't high point anything. He's not a great separator. He's not a great red zone target. He doesn't do anything particularly well. He's just big and fast and athletic. I think he shows a lot of laziness and bad discipline as a wide receiver, that I think he has a lot of bad habits that it's going to take a lot to break. So I don't think he's a first rounder. He might be a second rounder purely on athleticism, but he's clearly not going to be a first rounder despite all these people trying to mock him fairly early. He wasn't even invited to the NFL draft because the NFL thought that he might be sitting there and get embarrassed because nobody picked him in the first round. I think that says quite a lot if that's true, which I think it probably is, which that's kind of its own embarrassment that they'd even say that publicly. But I don't see it. I think he's Chase Claypool. Chase Claypool hasn't done anything. So I don't think that he's going to put up the stats that you want, and you can buy it on his athleticism. You can hope for a Christian Watson type year, which I think he's similar to Christian Watson in some regards, but I don't see it. He's another Martavius Bryant, another wide receiver who didn't quite make it. He could have a good year, maybe 2 good years, but I don't trust him on a dynasty league. I wouldn't want him on my team if it cost a high pick, especially with the real NFL. I wouldn't take him in the first 2 rounds. And that's where I think someone's probably going to take him in the second or high third.
We will see. I currently have him wide receiver 5 out of the 9 wide receivers that I have done projections on so far, but time will tell. And it looks like all we have left on tap is tight ends for next week.
Yeah, that's right. That might be a little bit quicker to go through. I don't think I'm going to have 12 in that case.
Right. It is a big tight end draft, but I think it's more top heavy than something
Yeah.
that's going to be a a large quantity of tight ends that get drafted high.
All right. Well, I think that does it for another episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you for downloading or listening to this episode, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment and share the show. Every little bit helps.
As always, you can find us with our handle N2EFantasy on Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Please give us a follow. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.